I spent hours in the gym every day with the singular goal of getting back out there. Disappointed isn't a big enough word.
The league's golden era was supposed to begin with Caitlin Clark, but instead, it's collapsing under the weight of its own negligence, corruption, and greed, and fans are furious beyond belief. Caitlin Clark's season-ending injury didn't just rob the WNBA of its brightest star. It ripped the very heart out of the league's future and exposed an ugly truth that can no longer be ignored. This wasn't some random accident or an unlucky twist of fate on the court. This was a slow-motion disaster years in the making, a perfect storm created by poor officiating, blatant targeting, and a league leadership more concerned with profits and public relations than the safety of its players. From the very first moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto a professional court, the signs were there for anyone who was paying attention. She wasn't just a rookie, she was a phenomenon. The kind of once-in-a-generation player who single-handedly boosted ticket sales, television ratings, and merchandise revenue to levels the WNBA had only dreamed of. Everywhere she went, arenas were sold out. Entire road games were moved to NBA-sized venues because Clark's presence guaranteed packed seats. Networks signed record-breaking broadcast deals on the assumption that Caitlin Clark would be the face driving viewership for years to come, but instead of protecting that investment, instead of safeguarding their most valuable asset, the league chose to exploit her, running her into the ground while turning a blind eye to the increasingly brutal treatment she was subjected to every single night. By May, the damage had already begun. Clark's quad tightened up in the preseason, a clear warning sign that her body was being pushed to its limits far too early. Most teams would have rested their star, carefully managed their minutes, and prioritized long-term health, not the WNBA, not the Indiana Fever. Instead, Clark was rolled out as the centerpiece of every practice session, every marketing event, every public appearance. She was the league's cash cow, and they milked her for everything she was worth. When June came, her quad issue escalated into repeated groin strains. Fans saw the pain etched on her face, the grimaces after hard falls, the limp she tried to hide when cameras were on her. But instead of hitting the brakes, instead of protecting her from further harm, the league kept her on the court, night after night, because they knew that without her, ticket sales would nosedive, television ratings would crater, and the entire WNBA growth narrative would implode. What made it worse, what turned frustration into outright rage among fans, was how blatantly physical and dangerous the play against Clark became as the season went on. Teams weren't just defending her, they were targeting her, hunting her, sending message fouls that had no place in a professional league. Possession after possession, Clark was shoved into screens, grabbed by the jersey, knocked off balance, and double-teamed before she even touched the ball. These weren't basketball plays, these were calculated hits, and everyone watching knew it. Fans saw it in real time. Analysts called it out on broadcasts. Clips went viral online showing Clark getting hammered off the ball with no whistle in sight. The referees weren't just missing calls, they were swallowing their whistles entirely, pretending it wasn't happening, and in doing so, they sent a clear message. Caitlin Clark would receive no special protection, no superstar treatment, not even the basic foul calls every other player expects. It wasn't just one team playing overly physical, it was the entire league taking liberties with a player they knew was carrying not only her team but the very sport itself. The Washington Post even documented the pattern, proving that this wasn't paranoia or bias. This was systemic. Last season, Clark received 20% of all flagrant fouls in the entire WNBA, most of them at the hands of Angel Reese and the Chicago Sky. Those weren't tough, competitive plays, those were blatant attacks, followed by laughter and mocking as Clark lay on the floor. And yet, the league did nothing. Imagine any other workplace where someone was repeatedly assaulted in front of cameras, where millions of people watched it happen, and the people in charge simply shrugged. In most industries, that would lead to arrests, lawsuits, and public outrage. In the WNBA, it was just another night. The very player responsible for half the league's growth, the one who filled arenas in Dallas, Las Vegas, New York, and Chicago, was left completely unprotected. While networks cut massive checks to broadcast her games, the referees refused to grant her even the most basic calls. The hypocrisy was staggering. The league begged for headlines about record ticket sales and new sponsorship deals built entirely on Caitlin Clark's name. Yet, when it came to doing the bare minimum, ensuring her safety on the court, they chose silence. And so, Clark's injuries weren't freak accidents. They were the inevitable result of a league that prioritized profits over player welfare. Her quad strain in May, her repeated groin tears in June and July, and finally, the devastating bone bruise in August weren't separate events. They were chapters of the same story. A young superstar being ground down by relentless abuse while those in charge looked the other way. Fans were not blind to this. They watched as Clark went from electrifying crowds with deep threes and no-look passes to grimacing through games. Her explosive first step slowing, her cuts coming up short, her body breaking down in front of their eyes. And when they demanded answers, when they called for better officiating and accountability, the league's response was silence at best and corporate doublespeak at worst. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, the person who should have been leading the charge to protect Clark and restore faith in the league, instead became a symbol of everything wrong with the WNBA. When she finally addressed Clark's season-ending injury, her statement was cold, sanitized, and completely detached from the reality fans were living. There was no acknowledgement of the officiating failures, no promise to fix the systemic targeting of players like Clark, no real accountability whatsoever. Just vague optimism about league growth and expansion, the same talking points she always used when cameras were rolling. To fans who had invested their money, their time, and their hope into this season, it was a slap in the face. They weren't just angry, they felt betrayed. That betrayal boiled over when it became clear that the league had been stringing fans along for weeks. Clark was consistently labeled day-to-day, a term meant to reassure the public that she was close to returning. In reality, those inside the locker room knew her body wasn't healing the way it needed to. She wasn't anywhere near 100%, but the league kept pushing the narrative to keep ticket sales high. Road games were marketed as must-see events featuring Clark, even as she sat on the bench in street clothes. Fans paid premium prices under false pretenses. And when the truth finally came out, when Clark announced herself that she would not be returning this season, the backlash was immediate and fierce. Refund demands flooded in. Ticket resale markets collapsed overnight. All-Star Game seats that had been selling for over $200 dropped to barely $60 within hours. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust. Fans felt used, manipulated, and lied to. And so, Caitlin Clark's season ended not with a single dramatic moment, but with a slow, painful unraveling that symbolized the league's failure on every level. The referees failed to protect her. The medical staff failed to manage her injuries. The commissioner failed to speak honestly with the fans. And the league as a whole failed to recognize that their entire future was riding on the shoulders of one young woman they treated as disposable. This isn't just a tragedy for Clark or for the Indiana Fever. It's a disaster for the WNBA itself. A league that has now been exposed for its short-sightedness and lack of accountability. And as the playoffs approach, the consequences are only beginning to be felt. The question now isn't just whether Caitlin Clark will come back stronger in 2026. It's whether the league she returns to will even deserve her loyalty. The WNBA had its brightest star, its golden ticket, and instead of protecting her, they threw her to the wolves, and now the league is paying the price in ways it never saw coming. Caitlin Clark's injury didn't just derail one player's season, it set off a chain reaction of chaos and mistrust that has left the entire WNBA in shambles. From the moment Clark went down, everything began to unravel. Ticket sales plummeted, television ratings tanked, and the league's carefully crafted image of unstoppable growth crumbled before our eyes. What makes this all the more infuriating for fans is that it didn't have to be this way. The warning signs were there for months. Clark's body was screaming for rest and recovery, but instead of listening, the league kept pushing, kept marketing, kept exploiting. Her quad strain in May should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it was treated like a minor inconvenience. Coaches, executives, and league officials knew she wasn't fully healthy, but they kept trotting her out there because Caitlin Clark wasn't just a player, she was the entire WNBA business model. When Clark returned to play through obvious pain in June, it was clear to anyone watching that she wasn't moving like her usual self. Her explosive drives to the basket were slower. Her step-back threes lacked their usual lift. Even her court vision, the thing that made her a generational talent, seemed clouded by fatigue and frustration. And still, she played heavy minutes every night while opponents were allowed to maul her with impunity. It wasn't just physical defense, it was targeted punishment. Opposing teams knew they could rough her up without consequence because the referees had set the precedent. Caitlin Clark wasn't going to get the calls other stars received. This wasn't just perception, it was reality, backed up by the numbers. Last season, Clark absorbed 20% of the league's flagrant fouls. A staggering statistic that should have prompted immediate action from league leadership. Instead, nothing changed. If anything, the targeting got worse. Angel Reese and other rivals weren't just defending Clark hard, they were actively trying to send a message. Clips circulated online of Clark being shoved to the floor, yanked by the arm, or blindsided by illegal screens while opponents laughed in her face. Fans were outraged, and yet the WNBA's response was silence. That silence became deafening when Clark's groin injury turned from a manageable strain into a full-blown tear. By July, she was clearly struggling to even walk comfortably, let alone play at the highest level. Yet she was still listed as day-to-day by the team and the league. That phrase, which should have reassured fans, became a symbol of deception. It implied progress, hinted at a return, and kept ticket sales flowing. In reality, it was a smokescreen. Behind the scenes, coaches and medical staff knew Clark wasn't close to returning, but admitting that publicly would have meant financial disaster. Entire road games had been scheduled in larger arenas specifically to accommodate the demand for Clark. Those matchups were promoted as marquee events featuring the league's biggest star. If fans knew she wouldn't be playing, the hype would collapse, and so would the revenue, so they kept lying, week after week, dangling the possibility of her return like a carrot on a stick. When the truth finally came out, when Clark herself took to social media to announce that her season was over, the backlash was immediate and brutal. Fans who had spent hundreds, sometimes thousands, of dollars to see her were livid. Refund requests flooded team offices. Ticket resale markets imploded. All-Star game seats that had been reselling for $200 dropped to under $60 overnight. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust, and that trust was shattered. People felt manipulated, tricked into spending their hard-earned money on a product the league knew it couldn't deliver. For months, the WNBA had sold a fantasy, the fantasy of Caitlin Clark, leading her team into the playoffs, dazzling crowds with deep threes and jaw-dropping passes. That fantasy evaporated in a single statement, and in its place came anger, betrayal, and a growing movement to boycott the league entirely. The economic fallout was staggering. Attendance dropped in every city where Clark wasn't playing. Television networks that had gambled primetime slots on her games saw ratings collapse almost overnight. Sponsors who had signed massive deals banking on the Clark effect suddenly found themselves tied to matchups that were losing relevance by the day. This wasn't a slow decline, it was a free fall. The WNBA had built its entire growth narrative on one player, and when that player went down, the whole house of cards came crashing down with her. Even the All-Star game, which was supposed to be a historic event showcasing Clark in front of her home crowd in Indiana, turned into a ghost town. Fans who had circled the date on their calendars for months were now demanding refunds. And those who still attended did so with bitterness and resentment. The atmosphere that should have been electric instead felt hollow, like a party thrown for a guest of honor who never showed up. This collapse didn't just hurt financially, it damaged the league's reputation in ways that may take years to repair. Sports fans understand injuries. They understand bad luck. What they don't understand, what they won't forgive, is being lied to. The WNBA's refusal to be transparent about Clark's condition turned a tough situation into a full-blown crisis. They could have been honest. They could have said in June, Caitlin Clark is dealing with a serious injury and will likely miss several months. Fans would have been disappointed, yes, but they would have respected the honesty. Instead, the league chose deception. They strung people along, kept selling tickets, kept promoting games, and in doing so, they destroyed the goodwill Clark had generated. Meanwhile, the targeting of Clark on the court went unchecked. Even after her injuries were public knowledge, opposing teams continued to play her physically, knowing the refs wouldn't intervene. It wasn't just Clark, either. Other Indiana Fever players like Sophie Cunningham and Aaliyah Boston began absorbing the same kind of punishment. The message was clear. If you wear an Indiana Fever jersey, don't expect a fair game. This perception of bias grew stronger with every missed call, every obvious foul that went unwhistled. Fans began to believe, with good reason, that the officiating wasn't just incompetent but corrupt. They saw Breanna Stewart getting 14 free throws in a game while Aaliyah Boston sat in foul trouble after barely 20 minutes on the floor. They saw A'ja Wilson going to the line 13 times while Caitlin Clark couldn't get a whistle even after being clotheslined. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the footage. Something was deeply wrong, and the league's refusal to address it only made the anger worse. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert became the face of that anger. When she finally spoke publicly about Clark's season-ending injury, her statement was everything fans didn't want to hear. It was cold, corporate, and completely detached from reality. There was no admission of mistakes, no plan to fix the officiating crisis, no acknowledgement of the fans' frustration. Just the same tired talking points about growth, expansion, and constructive dialogue. To the people who had invested their money, time, and passion into this league, it felt like a betrayal. Here was the commissioner of the WNBA confronted with the biggest crisis in years. And she chose to hide behind PR jargon instead of taking responsibility. Fans didn't just disagree with her, they felt insulted by her. Social media erupted. Hashtags calling for Engelbert's resignation trended nationwide. Longtime WNBA supporters who had defended the league through years of struggle now said they were done. Some demanded refunds for entire season ticket packages. Others posted screenshots of their canceled orders, urging others to do the same. Boycott talk spread like wildfire. No longer just a fringe idea but an organized movement with real momentum. Fans weren't just mad about Clark's injury. They were mad about the cover-up, the lies, the manipulation. They were mad about a league that seemed to care more about profits than people. And the worst part, the WNBA still didn't seem to get it. Even as arenas emptied and ratings collapsed, Engelbert and other league officials kept talking about expansion and revenue streams, as if those things mattered more than the very foundation of the sport. They failed to understand that growth isn't just about numbers, it's about trust. And once that trust is broken, no amount of marketing spin can fix it. Caitlin Clark's season-ending injury wasn't just a setback, it was a reckoning. It forced fans to confront an ugly truth. The league they love had failed to protect its most important player, and in doing so, it had failed them too. The ripple effects are still spreading. Playoff games that should have been sold out are now facing empty sections. Merchandise that once flew off shelves now sits unsold. Sponsors are quietly reconsidering their commitments. The league's dream of becoming a major force in professional sports has been dealt a blow that may take years